All right, welcome to Citizen Assembly Indigenize, a citizen assembly meeting produced by the Universal Community Project and Neighborhood Responsiveness Marketplace. Let's not ask how we can support Indigenous and Native Americans with money and flyers, although you can still do that too. Rather, let us ask how we can emulate them and live in holistic balance with each other and our earth. Join kindred spirits in examining Indigenous and Native American community, systems, and traditions. The program will begin with a presentation of Indigenous thoughts and actions. Then participants will discuss ways of implementing the same in our own daily lives. Participants can return and share experiences, what worked, what didn't. Our program will often center around Sherri Mitchell's sacred instructions. If you want to get involved, our contact information is in the video description. Let's start with a round of introductions to tell our listeners who we are and where we're from. And I'll start. I'm Stacy Gustafson. I split my time between Northern Michigan and Southwest Texas, and my major focus is holistic community problem solving. And I'm just going to go down the line as I see you guys here. So Cole, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, my name's Cole White. I am a writer. I specialize in science fiction, speculative fiction, nonfiction stories, and also philosophy. Focus on mathematical philosophy and logic. My main focus is on political action in terms of writing and also true direct democracy, right straight to the government, people to the government, and the forms of direct democracy like in ancient Greece and beyond. Okay, that's it.
Very interesting, Cole. Thank you for that. All right, Ilya, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Hello, my name is Ilya. I'm from Ukraine, so I'm just going to listen.
Thank you very much for being here, Ilya. Lois, you're up next.
Hello, everybody. My name is Lois Diggs. Right now, I am in Norfolk, Virginia. I am arguably from a number of different places, but I live in Virginia right now. And I am the host of Citizen Assembly Women, second and fourth Sundays of the month. Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you so much, Lois, for coming. Good to see you. Daniel. Daniel is a co-host of our show today. Daniel, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, Dan Tweed, KK6VDR is my ham radio extra class call sign. We're here in Thousand Oaks, California, Ventura County, where I'm known for having been a twice candidate for city council, and have plans to run again in 2022. And I'm on track to, if I keep up with my vote doubling, I'll have 32,000 votes by 2026, and that should be a majority to get on the 5-seat council. And meantime, I'm a caregiver for my elder companion friend, Larry here. And I too am a writer. In fact, we're working on a screenplay for his amazing life story. So get out to the street fair October 17th that the Rotary Club is doing. I'll have a booth there, which is also World Extreme Poverty Awareness Day. And anyway, that's me. You want to introduce yourself, Larry, here, since you're in the same audio mic window here?
Yeah, well, thanks, Daniel. And Larry, take it away.
I really am overwhelmed by the fact that Dan is so interested in my life story. I didn't find it all that interesting.
Well, Hollywood sounds it. Believe me, Hollywood wants to hear his story.
But I don't know. I fancied myself as a writer, and I did write basically news stories, tough pieces for people I would encounter in my daily life as a salesman for Chamber of Commerce memberships. And I made a wide assortment of, not friends, but just acquaintances. And it was really educational because I got a real hands-on understanding of how the economy works just by talking to people in a relaxed setting, Chamber of Commerce. And I am retired. Don't even have a retirement income. That's where Dan comes in. He's managed to keep me afloat.
Well, your son is kind of handling the finances, I guess.
Yeah, my son David lives with us. That's about it. I never published much. Puff pieces for businesses that I would sign up for the Chamber of Commerce, either in the Orange County or Garden Grove City, and made a lot of interesting acquaintances in that regard, and got an understanding of the retail end of the business. And that exposure was about maybe 3 years, and I did my writing and providing those puff pieces, about 300 words in length, published in the Chamber of Commerce, or they could publish it in any local paper that they wanted.
Very
The
interesting.
introductions are sort of brief, Larry. Yeah.
All right, I've talked enough. Wasn't that
Writers,
interesting?
writers, though.
Yeah,
Writers,
once
nice.
you get
Yeah, a
a writer
writer.
started, it's hard to stop a writer.
So glad to have you here, Larry. Thank you. We'll have to learn
Thank you.
more about what you've learned about the economy. That is very important. All right. We have Abdul next.
Uh-oh, she's getting.
Abdul might be frozen.
Yeah, you're getting a little breaky up.
Yeah, you're getting a little glitchy.
Okay. I think Abdul is frozen. Let's go to Kevin. Kevin, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi there, I'm Kevin calling in from north of Toronto, Ontario, Canada. Excited to be here today. My interest is in pre-colonial democracy and philosophy. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Thanks for being here. And I believe that's everybody. If not, just yell. Oh, Abdul, I see you're not frozen anymore. Abdul, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Abdul from Ghana, and my interest is good governance and then overall development of everybody and making life worthy of living for every individual. And
Hell yeah.
I'm very, very
Excellent. Thank you, Abdul, for being here. And last but not least, Cynthia just popped in. Cynthia, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Well, of course I would. My name is Cynthia Leonard. I am in the great state of Arkansas, and I am a representative for core-iop.org, Radio Hydrogen, and various and sundry other projects that I happen to be working on right now. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for coming, Cynthia. All right. Thank you all for sharing. And I will move on to today's presentation. Today, we will be discussing missing and murdered Indigenous women, and I will start screen sharing and proceed with the reading. There are a lot of sites with information about murdered and missing Indigenous women. I chose this one because their team seems, I feel like they are like me in a lot of ways, and they just want to get out in nature, and they're connected to kind of the issues that all of us are struggling with on all sides. So here's where I would like to start. Our women and girls are being taken from us in an alarming way. As of 2016, the National Crime Information Center has reported 5,712 cases of missing American Indian and Alaska Native women and girls. Strikingly, the U.S. Department of Justice Missing Persons Database has only reported 116 cases. We're talking over almost 6,000 cases are missing, and the Department of Justice only has 116 cases reported. The majority of these murders are committed by non-Native people on Native-owned land. The lack of communication combined with jurisdictional issues between state, local, and tribal law enforcement make it nearly impossible to begin the investigative process. The statistics: Indigenous women and girls are murdered 10 times higher than all other ethnicities. Murder is the third leading cause of death for Indigenous women. More than 4 out of 5 Indigenous women have experienced violence. More than half of Indigenous women experience sexual violence. More than half have been physically abused by their intimate partners. Around half have been stalked in their lifetime. Indigenous women are 1.7 times more likely than Anglo women to experience violence and 2 times more likely to be raped. Murder rate of Indigenous women is 3 times higher than Anglo-American women. Data collection remains difficult because of poor record keeping, underreporting, racial misclassification, and media coverage. Statistics from law enforcement and media reports create an inaccurate picture because these reports minimize the extent to which Indigenous women and girls experience violence. In each of these state reports, inaccuracies exist due to underreporting and racial misclassification. Further, the lack of consistent and current data limit the depth of these reports. Therefore, the statistics are most likely an undercount. While condensing Indigenous women's experiences into a numerical value is a heavy burden that potentially relegates human women, girls, and Two-Spirit into statistics, the current numbers illustrate the harrowing conditions for Indigenous persons within the U.S. The purpose of this project is to provide a breadth of statistics related to murdered and missing Indigenous women within the United States. Below there is a list of state names with their respective report and statistics. And it's long and it's sad. And I'm really overwhelmed by this that has been brought to my attention only recently. And I look forward to discussing this and raising awareness about it. So I always have a lot of comments, but would anybody else like to start out? Daniel, I know that you were doing a lot of reading up on this and have some interesting information. Would you like to tell us what you've learned?
Well, I think if we use the hashtag MMIW, that will shed more awareness on the issue, because frankly, I just think it's not an issue. It's not on people's radar very much. So with most worthy causes, just raising awareness about it is huge. But yeah, I just watched a great TED Talk about a woman runner who raises awareness by donating her medals to the families of MMIW victims. And there's a Vice news story that just came out late last year that's very equality about the Montana situation. There's like some really precious young girls that have just, totally turned up dead in Montana, and it's heartbreaking stuff. And I know Cynthia had her hand up too. Or you want to?
No, please do continue.
Step on her. So I'm that's what I got so far off the top of my head.
All I was going to say was I knew the problem was bad, but when you see the numbers, you realize how truly bad it is, and I'm kind of blown away by that. Even though I did know about this, I'm still like, whoa, that's a lot of freaking people. And I wonder if we are doing them a service by turning it into an acronym and a hashtag. Like perhaps we should write it out, instead of what was the acronym you used, Daniel? MMIW?
Yeah, I think they use that too. So I don't think it's exploitative to do that. And it's probably a worldwide problem too. I mean, it's not just North America. I mean, It should be a worldwide focus, actually.
My intention was not to imply that it was exploitive in any way. I just don't know that anybody is going to know what that, because as you said, it is kind of a non-issue now. And if you're putting an acronym of a non-issue that people aren't even aware of, like wouldn't it be better to just tell them what it is that you're doing, so that, because most people aren't going to take the time to figure out what MMIW means.
Well, I would say that Kevin has written in the chat, he highly recommends hashtag red dress, hashtag MMIWG, and hashtag MMIW. Thank you, Kevin, for
Yeah,
that.
and part of the thing about hashtags is if they're short, people are more likely to go to them, and they might just get curious, say, what does that stand for? And then they find out something they didn't know.
Yeah. Cole, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah. So, like, first of all, really heartbreaking to hear something that I totally didn't know about. So what's going on? Like, what's happening here? Is it just spousal abuse? Is it like systemic, like, predation of women in the culture?
Yeah.
Is it like what I'm just talking out of my ass right now because I really don't know what's going on, you know? When you get into like factors of two, you know that there's a significant statistical relevance that, yeah, like they're dying at a more increased rate than the normal population. Factors of two are kind of undeniable. So which is why it's really concerning. And also, what else is going on? Like, is it possibly due to, like, because I know since the recession and COVID has happened, that murder rate has gone up in almost every city. Murders are becoming not only more prevalent, but more successful in almost every city. And that's just because of the recession. But, weird thing is, a lot of the other crime has gone down. So that's just what the COVID recession has done. Now, in this case, you've got sort of long-term poverty and tribal council handing down only specific funds, and people are like really on the outs, and they've been living a recession for their whole lives. So what's going on here? What's at the bottom? And what's the causes? Like, I just want to know one question. Who are the murderers? Who are the ones that murder them? That's all.
I think Kevin had his hand up next, and then Cynthia.
Well, I'd like to suggest that it's important to recognize that the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls narrative is been, I believe, primarily a Canadian narrative. And there's been ongoing awareness campaigns and discussions about missing and murdered Indigenous women in Canada for many years now. I'd have to say probably almost 20 years, in that there is, in the west of Canada, there is, it's highly resource-based economy, which means that there's a lot of travel work camps in the north that have working rotations, 30 days, fly in to work up at the mine and then fly home for 2 weeks and such. So it's a highly transient construction atmosphere out that way. And there is a fairly, is a fairly aware Indigenous community that speaks directly to the man camps as being the likely exposure to missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls in Canada. I'm very aware and followed have been following this for quite some time, and this is primarily my own personal reasons for following it is because I myself have traveled the west of Canada doing retail construction for pretty much my whole career. So although I was not in a resource-based economy, I was in a construction-based economy, and I traveled in and out of the west of Canada. So I've been aware of the MMIW and MMIWG, which is Women Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. So I've been very aware of it for, like I said, almost 20 years. And seemingly to me anyways, that the American awareness to the MMIW is relatively new by comparison. That being said, at the Human Rights Museum in Winnipeg, where the red dress movement started, it's an intriguing story to understand where red dress came from, and then how the Human Rights Museum's art installation by Jamie Black, who is an American, is up in the Canadian Human Rights Museum. So I yield. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Kevin. Cynthia?
Yes, I was just going to address what Cole was saying. I can tell you, because I've actually also been involved in this for about 20 years, ever since, because Arkansas, Oklahoma is a big Native American area, plus Washington State, and I've been all over the country. And first of all, I would say they're not living in recession; they're living in destitution. There are entire, and again, no one has corrected me thus far. I'm not sure if reservation is still the correct word, but that's the only word that I know. I'm an old lady, and I'm sorry. There are still entire reservations that don't have plumbing. There are still entire reservations that don't have electricity, where the average rate of death for an adult man is 48 years old, and the average lifespan for an adult woman is 52, because there has been so much toxic waste dumped onto their land. I will also tell you that within their, and that kind of plays to within their culture, the violence and things of that nature. But then there's this whole other aspect, because they are considered sovereign. When they're murdered on Native American land, then America doesn't have any jurisdiction there, if that makes sense to you. Like the regular police can't go in there, and their police can't come over to the other side. So they go. It would be almost like if you went to Mexico, murdered someone, and then left. That it's the same kind of situation, except as Stacy mentioned, the communication is so poor. There's not even an extradition process, and most communities aren't even willing to investigate to find out who the predators are. So that is my understanding of it.
Is it possible that we're dealing with serial killers, but that the FBI can't investigate?
It is possible. However, I would say it's more a matter of perception, because we have had such an adversarial perception of Native American people. I mean, we designed an entire system. We set up an entire system designed to exterminate them. And perception has, changed away from extermination, yet we're all still okay with them being in the system that we designed.
Yeah, and serial killers are usually the ones who have a troubled family history. So, yeah, not to put that as the main narrative, but I mean, it's just, I just want to know what's going on.
I do too.
They said it's non-native people.
Yeah. It's Abdul's turn next. Go ahead, Abdul.
This problem we are discussing here, I think it's a very critical problem. But I think first we need to take a look at who is the victim here and why are they the victim, and why is so much is not being done to resolve this issue. It's very bad for some particular group of people to, to just be murdered like that without any just cause, without being approved by the law or something else, and without committing any crime. We need to find out who are these people, what do they do, where do they live, before we find out what do they do to invite or to attract such misfortunes towards them. We need to find the root cause of this problem. Why is it that indigenous women are either murdered, raped, or abused in so many ways? Why is that the case? And those people that are also those people that are also committing the crime of murder, raping, abusing, or torturing indigenous women, those people needs to be questioned. Why are they doing what they do? Who sent them? For what reason are they doing what they do? And then, we need to know their motive, so that we try to solve the problem both sides. Maybe if the indigenous women are doing something that is causing that misfortune towards them, then they stop doing what they do. And then if the murderers too are just also having some kind of shall I say desire or some kind of nerves that drives them towards the torture and abuse of indigenous women, then we see how we can address that so that we solve it both simultaneously. I yield the floor.
Thank you, Abdul. That's foremost in my mind too. What is the information behind this and why don't we have it? Go ahead, Kevin.
I'd have to weigh in and suggest that it's inequality. Inequality is what drives it, because indigenous women will be forced into prostitution because of the need for finances, and therefore when they are forced into prostitution, they become marginalized within their own community. Then they become increasingly marginalized within the camp styled community. That you have to understand within this camp community, in terms of workers that fly in and out of camps, like it spans the entire country. Like you'll have Canadians on the east coast of Canada flying into northern Yellowknife to work in diamond mines, and they literally fly around the country. So there is that by way of how that workforce travels, it's if you were a predator, well, the way that the system's designed, it kind of gives you the best field of opportunity to continue to be a predator, because you're flying in and out of the area where things are happening. So again, inequality is the common denominator of the exposure that the indigenous community has to force themselves into, even if that's the exposure of being in a community that has no drinking water. It's all rooted in inequality that's driven by the colonial system.
Yeah, that is just an amazing point there, Kevin. And I did actually, so there are 2 points there. One of them being the work camps. And I actually saw a movie with Jeremy Renner in it. It was a wonderful movie. And it talked, the subject of the movie was exactly that. It was a work camp where a Native American woman visited her boyfriend and was attacked. They were both attacked. He was killed and she was raped and then ran and died. And I didn't understand at the time I watched that movie that was really telling us about this. And maybe there were some details that I missed from that movie, but I'm glad there's a movie out there. I'm glad I understand now that the work camp thing is a big part of it. And then I wanted to ask you, Kevin, do you have some personal knowledge about the women being forced into the prostitution, and then that exposes them to these things? And because that is what is happening, we're not hearing that the women who are killed are being forced into these professions due to circumstances, and that's a major cause? Or are you speculating?
I would say that there's a bit of speculation there, but I don't think that speculation would be challenged by anyone within the Indigenous community. That I'm quite certain. But however, we don't have anyone from the Indigenous community on this call to speak to that directly. But I can assure you that there is, not unlike different communities, you can even consider the Caribbean as being one of those communities that have very similar acceptances towards institutionalized prostitution, in that, using Jamaica as an example, that families survive by the prostitution of their own people. And it just may not be at the cost of missing and murdered women, but the root of the problem remains the same, and that there's inequality that forces people to prostitute themselves.
Thank you, Kevin. That makes so much sense. That really helps me. Cynthia, you posted a YouTube link?
Yeah, it just sort of speaks to some of the conditions that they have on the reservations. It's called the Canary Effect. For anybody who wants to watch it, it's a sort of a mini documentary about some of the toxic waste that has been dumped on Indigenous lands, and what they are actively not doing about any of it. And if I may speak to Kevin's point, yes, and this plays out in the media too. Like they will show us what they think we care about, and you don't see stories about missing Black children. You don't see stories about missing Indigenous women. You don't see stories about missing Black women. And they're out there. They're absolutely out there. So what are we going to do about that, except stop looking at other groups of people as less than what we are?
Thank you, Cynthia. I'm going to ask Daniel, you said you lived in a migrant environmental workhouse and it encouraged poor behavior choices. I can definitely see how that would affect this issue. If you wanted to go ahead, relate that a little bit more, Daniel.
Well, it was a company rented house in Lemoore where we were cleaning up the groundwater on Lemoore Naval Air Station, building this huge water processing treatment plant. And there were like, I think, seven or eight of us, maybe it was like 5 or 6. Anyway, when you're away from home, you end up doing, goofy things. We probably were drinking too much. And I remember one time someone fell asleep and we painted his toenails red, as a prank, and they did stuff like put a dead rabbit in my my luggage, and it was goofy stuff that people do when they're away on, extended work camp type situations. So I don't know if that's that all that relevant. So just wanted
that does feel relevant to me. I think that explains at least half of that situation very well. Thank you, Daniel.
Okay.
Kevin, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to share another example of inequality, in that in Canada on the West Coast, there is couple bus companies. One's called Greyhound or whatever the case may be. It's a large busing company that does regular routes in between different cities out west. Well, I remember, I think it was last year that Greyhound stopped doing certain runs within different cities in the West, that but just by stopping those services, it further risks women and people, Indigenous people that rely on this busing company. By them stopping to provide the services, it further exposed the Indigenous community to risk. And again, you know, that company was a private company that just said, screw it, we're not going to service these small markets anymore. And they just stopped the service. So again, you know, because of wealth isolation and the perception of ROI, return on investment, and all those things that drive big business decisions, you know, here it is again, the Indigenous people that are forced to live with the byproducts of what the decisions are made based on the colonial system of isolating wealth and marginalizing people of difference. So like there's so many different examples of this, of the same problem showing itself in different corners of the room. And it's inequality and greed. And as a byproduct of those things, sexual abuse just slots in to the magazine of bullets that are consistently fired at people of any difference to white people. I yield.
I agree, Kevin. That was beautiful. Thank you for that. So that kind of brings me to the idea that if forced prostitution, and I'm not saying forced as in somebody's holding a gun to somebody's head and saying you have to do it, but it's forced if you have no means of self-support, I believe. And I understand that colonization of Indigenous tribes was the first idea of the concept of prostitution for Indigenous peoples. Like it didn't exist before we came and colonized. I visited New Zealand, and there was a great museum exhibit about what happened to the Indigenous people before and after the colonization. And the workers and the social people came in and were offering what seemed like great opportunities for the Indigenous people, and they socialized and they invited them to come with them, and then used the Indigenous people for prostitution and sex and whatever else, and land rights. And the Indigenous people were just completely unaware of that. And then the women ended up in prostitution, and it didn't exist before that. So it's a colonization thing that I didn't know of before I read that. And I think that would be important for people to know as well.
I am curious, Stacy, because you said you went through like a couple of different articles looking for the one that resonated with you. Were the numbers essentially the same for all of the places that you looked?
You know, I didn't compare the actual numbers, but what I did see were lists of these statistics, just immensely long lists of the statistics. You just can't believe how high the numbers are. And there's a book about Indigenous masculinity by, I think it's Innes, INNES, that goes over for like a couple of chapters, I think, just how extensive this is. So that was more of a gut wrench, an even more gut wrenching example. And I chose the one I chose because it, I don't know, maybe that's my problem. It was easier to stomach, and I felt more like these women who are on the website, and I probably should have just gone with the more true and gut wrenching one.
Well, truth is often ugly, is it not? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Mark Aaron is joining us. Just so you know, I let him in.
Yeah. Mar Aaron, welcome. We were just discussing the murdered and missing Indigenous women, and the incredible statistics about that, and how little people know about it. And would you like to introduce yourself to us, Mar? Perhaps not. All right.
Perhaps not.
I wasn't being rude. I just was fumbling with the controls.
Okay.
I really can't participate since I'm just barging in here. But if I'm going to introduce myself, I'm an educated person in northeastern U.S. and I saw on Amazon Prime Video a movie about women that were being disappeared in Mexico. If that's part of your
Yes,
data set.
absolutely.
There's a whole movie. There's a whole movie about a person by name, and there's in the movie they show she disappeared, and there was other women disappearing in, I believe it was Mexico. Pretty sure. I think it was what's that place called? Juarez. They just disappear.
Did they have any oh, go ahead, Cynthia.
I just want to point out that Juarez is right on the border of Texas. I've actually been to Juarez. It's right across the border. So they might be getting taken and brought back to the United States, or they might just get like it's the same thing as it is with the American Indigenous people. They go onto their area, do whatever they want, and then leave and never have to face any consequences.
Mar, were there any conclusions about who were performing these murders and missing people?
The movie was about a woman that found the murderer, and the court system was, I guess, bribed by this person, and they acquitted him or something. And the family never got legal justice with respect to the murder. And the movie was about the fact that there's corruption and that. So that's a problem in Mexico, is they don't have a functioning legal system. There's so much drug money going through it. Everybody's corrupt.
That makes so much sense. Thank you, Mar. Daniel, go ahead.
So then one more thing. There's a movie called The Missing Women of Mexico. Literally, that's the title. It's 2017 on Amazon Prime. But I'm not sure that's the same movie that I watched. It doesn't look like the same picture. So there may be more than one movie.
I was just going to say, speaking of Amazon Prime, if you have that, there's a great documentary called The Monopoly on Violence that just came out. And that speaks a lot to this issue as well. So just another Amazon Prime recommendation. not trying to plug Amazon here. That's it.
Thanks, Daniel. So I guess I'd like to find out, it's a great topic to discuss, but our program is about how do we make changes in our lives to emulate Indigenous people. And so how would we take this to heart and change what we're doing in our lives to make this problem less? Would anybody have any ideas on that? Cynthia, go ahead.
Well, I would say that speaking about it at every possible chance is just like you're doing here, just like you're doing now, for whoever is willing to sit still long enough to listen, and just talking about it and showing them the facts and the evidence and saying, why is this still, this is freaking 2021. How are we still having this effing conversation? You know what I'm saying? Sorry, I get upset.
So true. Daniel, go ahead.
You know, when I run for city council, my main platform that I tell people is the government is not doing anywhere near enough on health and safety issues, especially long-term, regenerative power of the biosphere but I, took the CERT training, which is community emergency responder training, which anyone can take online. You can study for your amateur radio license online. There's something called InfraGuard, which is an arm of the FBI for guarding infrastructure. And tribal communities are unfortunately really under-resourced when it comes to this kind of thing. So, I'm thinking I'm going to get more active with the Rotary Club, probably Rotary International, and maybe they could have some kind of outreach to help resource up, under-resourced areas, not just, in North America and Indigenous, but the world. I mean, there's simple things like towers that have microphones that can instantly triangulate gunshots. There's drones now that can airlift medevac victims, to hospital facilities in a matter of minutes, instead of hours. There's all kinds of great, technological tools that we could bring to bear on this problem. So I think there's a lot of potential there, and I'll yield the floor. Thanks.
Those are great ideas. Kevin, go ahead.
I would recommend the thing to do is to look within the different, look within Indigenous ways. Like I take a look at, we talked about this a little while back, the great law of peace that is of the Iroquois Confederacy, which is, northeastern United States and Canada. So there'll be a different, there may be different Indigenous teachings from other tribes and other regions, Indigenous people in other regions, of course. However, when it comes to Turtle Island being North America, that the northeastern community of the Mohawks were primarily involved with a lot of the early governance and early communication between the Indigenous peoples of Turtle Island and the settling community. So I think it's important to look at their teachings to try and learn a little bit about how their governance was working prior to contact, because there was pre-contact democracy in Turtle Island, and the US Constitution and the arrows in the claw of the eagle represent the 5 tribes of the Iroquois, and the 5 arrows represent the 5 nations, the original 5 nations. And is the US Constitution is borrowed from Joseph Brant, who was a Mohawk. So I think it's important to look at some of their teachings as a way for us to learn about what they had before we got here, and then to try and relay those messages. And then while doing that, look towards other pre-colonial philosophy in other commonwealths and try and meet other people that were living within countries that had pre-colonial philosophy.
I absolutely agree, Kevin. I personally am working towards recreating the pre-colonial society in my own little way. And it's so true. If we just get the word out, that's better than nothing. I feel it's still so inadequate. I wish that I could have some guidance from some Native Americans or other Indigenous, that if they have ideas. Yeah. So Mar, go ahead.
Yeah, I found a description of this movie titled "The Missing Women of Mexico." It reads, "Since 1993, hundreds of women have disappeared from the border town of Juarez, Mexico, just across the Rio Grande River from El Paso, Texas. Acclaimed filmmaker Charlie Min delves into these mysterious unsolved crimes that have sunk Juarez, Mexico into a human rights disaster." This is a 2017 movie. The movie that I actually watched was about a particular woman who they found the murderer, and he was able to escape justice because of corruption of the court. I also remember seeing a movie, probably fiction or not, where women were being taken out of foster homes or halfway homes and from Mexico, and being brought to secret illicit brothels and abused. And when they got used up, so to speak, they were killed. And in one scene, they brought women from Mexico, apparently from Mexico, and they were damaged in some way. They were abused, and they were all murdered before they were put into work at the brothel. So the proximity of Juarez to the U.S. could imply that these women are being trafficked and sold into the U.S. So it's just easier to move them out of one town close to the border, I'm guessing. But apart from that, it seems like there's a supply and demand problem here. So if women are being kidnapped, maybe what needs to be done is women have to be protected by some technology. I would say go the opposite direction and not assume that Indians don't kidnap other Indians. I mean, Native Americans, I assume that they did. I think they did kidnap other Native Americans. So maybe if women had a tracking device at all times, or a system like that, they would be more secure, at least in places where there's a predictable. Now in South Africa, women are entitled or encouraged to get rape insurance because the frequency of rape is so common that women, there's actually a product called rape insurance. So maybe there needs to be in Mexico an abduction insurance that is triggered automatically by some technology, and there's some wealth behind it, so that people actually have a chance of being rescued and not rely upon the government.
Tracking, that's very interesting. Thank you, Mar. And the idea of human trafficking, I think could definitely be a big part of this. I see Kevin's hand is up. Is that from before? If we have,
Yeah, sorry, that's from before.
okay, if we have no more comments, we can move into closing remarks. All right. I again will go right down who I'm looking at on the screen here, and you, Larry, are first. Do you have any closing remarks for us, Larry? Daniel, you're on mute. Yep.
Okay, Larry's unmuted.
Okay.
Well, it's been quite a tourist tour of the various. I've been on the Window Rock reservation, and it was quite an experience. It was in 1954. I think I've mentioned this before previously, and I didn't realize they had the problem that apparently exists to this day. I tell you, the Indians are really come up against the white people, haven't they? Us whites. I don't really have anything to say other than that enlightening, believe me. I was unaware.
Yeah, it's shocking. Thank you very much, Larry. Thank you so much for attending. And Daniel, you're next.
Yeah, it's another good presentation. I guess this is our third episode of Indigenize now.
Gosh, I think this is 4 now.
4, wow. Maybe people that aren't speaking could mute their mics, because I noticed we're getting a little bit of extraneous noise from the non-speakers. Thanks. Yeah, I love the idea of a technological edge. to get out in front of these health and safety issues, because they're universal, not just to humans, but to the whole biosphere, really. Humans are not the only creatures in the biosphere, and the indigenous people manage the biosphere in such a loving, stewardful way. That's the main thing we need to return to one of them. And if we can bring the best of non-indigenous culture and the best of indigenous culture together, I think we've got a great future potentially. So that's enough. My closing remark, and thanks y'all for being here. I'll move on.
Yeah, thank you, Daniel. I absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. Cynthia, you're next.
Yes, thank you very much. As I was listening to Mar Aaron talk about technology, and I was like, well, yeah, that's all well and good, but none of that prevents kidnapping, none of that prevents rape, none of that prevents human trafficking. Like, you can have all the insurance in the world, but that's not going to mean that you're not still raped. And then I thought, well, then what is the alternative to that? And the alternative is in changing the system, getting rid of the corruption, making the world a better place overall. And in the time that it would take to, in the time that it is going to take to change the system, in the meantime, yes, I think a technological answer might be about the only answer we have at this point. I mean, again, this is 2021. How is it that women are still commoditized in this manner? Like, supply and demand. Are you kidding me? These are human beings. And the fact that this has been continued tells me that whatever offense that it falls under legally is not being enforced, or is not being harshly judged enough. And honestly, I really wish I had the answer. I don't know, but I'm all in favor of technology if that gets us to where we want to be. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. Yeah, I agree with that as well. Lois, you're next.
Thank you. On the topic of tracking technology, I think that if people knew that women in a certain community had trackers, that might prevent people from going after them, knowing that they're more likely to be caught and found out. However, I think that it's very, very important for women of a community to be fully informed about this, and not only and that they would want that, because if a historically colonizing culture is giving disadvantaged women something that tracks wherever they are, that might not be received well. It might feel like just another way to control or, follow, confine. It might feel like it's confining. But I don't know, like if people want to have that kind of thing, then sure. I'm just saying that it's really, really important, that is really what they want. And then I also echo Daniel's desire to combine the best of Indigenous and non-Indigenous culture, because I think it is a good idea because one of the solutions we talked about in response to the problem that was presented today of missing and murdered Indigenous women was to examine Indigenous culture before colonization and emulate it. That sounds, there are good things to emulate. However, I think we should also keep in mind that these cultures ended up colonized and were not prepared to deal with intruders. And so we should take the best of Indigenous cultures, but also learn from history and make sure that we are prepared against potential intruders or colonizers ourselves. Thank you. I yield the floor.
Again, I very much agree. Thank you, Lois. Really enjoyed having you here. Thank you. Kevin, you're next.
I don't know where to start other than to suggest that common denominator of the reasons why people would be willing to find themselves within prostitution for money. You know, like there are examples of prostitution in different parts of the world that are all consistently connected to inequality as being the driving factor that forces people into those situations. And until we talk about inequality, you know, that really is the common denominator. You know, if you take a look at Indigenous pre-contact, again, going back to the Iroquois Confederacy, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy of my area, which is Ontario, you know, that was a matrilineal leadership. It was women in the family line that transferred power to women within the family line. And that was the matrilineal governance structure. Men were expendable in that women leaders had to stay at home and look after the children. And that's why men were put in position to execute the demands of the women leadership, because women were more important because they were looking after the children. So men were put in place within leadership, within Indigenous governance. And it was post contact by, you know, by the settling community that forced that card to be played, because the women, Indigenous women, seen that the settling community had men as leaders. So it was decided that men would be created or would be put in position of leadership to deal with the colonial leadership. But prior to contact, it was women in the lead. So, you know, for us to look at pre-contact philosophy moving forward, it would be to replace women within the colonial governance structures, replace men, get them out, and put women in leadership. And if you take a look at just a sidebar note, that when you take a look at COVID and the reactions of the world in how governments looked after their people when it came to COVID, the top 3 or 4 countries were run by women, and the bottom 3 or 4 countries in the COVID response were run by men. So, you know, there's so many different examples that show us that there's better ways out there. But, you know, the isolation of wealth and the greed of the colonial system is what keeps it the way it is right now.
Thank you very much, Kevin. And I really appreciate, I know that you immerse yourself in your local Indigenous community and educate yourself. And I really appreciate you bringing that to the meeting here. Thank you very much for attending. And Mar, you're next.
Oh, okay. I actually had a phone call come in, so I didn't catch the last few minutes, but I just wanted to point out some history. The history of slavery and abducting women is ancient, and there was a number of incidents that really put an end to the practice on an official or global scale, and that was the rise of Catherine the Great. She created an army that went down to Crimea and through the slave traders out of Crimea. And then there was also Thomas Jefferson, who sent gunships to North Africa and Tripoli, and he ended a huge slave trade of Christian women that were being kidnapped from ships and from the shores of the Mediterranean European countries. And then there was the American Civil War, where they ended the practice of, well, I guess it wasn't kidnapping, but there was sex slave trade that was growing in the South, and the Southerners were breeding white-skinned Negro slaves, and they were getting a lot of money for this. So that's one of the reasons they put an end to slavery. So you have a history of violence that was directed towards, to one extent or another, the end of the trafficking in women. So I think that violence is a legitimate solution to the problem if you can identify the populations that are engaging in the practice. So if we have a problem in Juarez, Mexico, we have the technology to eliminate the trafficking in women through violence. And if you think about it, if you eliminate enough men in a region that are engaging in this, you can eliminate, you create a supply and demand. So you have more women than men, there's less demand for abducting women. So we could very easily solve the problem through violence. And I think that needs to be considered.
Thank you very much, Mar. Ilya, if you have a closing remark, you can go after me here. Just jump on in. I will go next and say, I'm actually really encouraged by the information that I've learned from you guys in the meeting today. I do have some new ideas for ways to approach this. And the one that really sticks out to me is the corruption issue, that if our courts are corrupt, and they clearly are, and they're biased towards people with money, that would make it really, even if the Native Americans were allowed in our court systems, it would make it incredibly difficult to find out who's doing this and hold them responsible. So I think a really big part of it could be the corruption aspect. I mean, obviously, right? And the trackers, I think, is a great idea. And I do wonder what, first of all, what are the personal issues that people would have for that? I would be interested in bringing that up and getting people's opinions. And then how would the trackers be weaponized? It seems like any solution that people come up with, the greedy people will find a way to weaponize it. But I am really encouraged by our conversation today. I have new avenues to pursue, and I appreciate that so much from all of you. And Ilya has said that he does not have any closing comments for us. So thank you all so much for participating in Citizen Assembly Indigenize. Please come back next week and give us your insights and experiences about indigenizing your life. Thank you again.